Let's face it, hiring help is not easy these days. Let XenTegra Staffing help you find the right person for the right job. Head over to XenTegra.com/XenTegra Staffing to find out more and let us staff your people needs. Welcome to another Citrix Session with your host, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton, your source for all things Citrix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 22, right, Bill? 22?
Yeah, 22.
This is our second one of the week. So I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I'm on with Bill Sutton, of course, the Director of Services at XenTegra. A lot of times, Bill, I ask you about the number of projects you got going on. Is it still in the 45 to 50 range?
No, it's come down a little bit. It's probably more like in the mid-30s now, maybe a little bit less than that, to be honest with you.
Is that because of a lot of people maybe slowing down on projects and just trying to salvage what they've got right now, or what's causing that?
I think that's part of it, yes. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, with us, we have a guy named Bryan Mann. Bryan and I go back, probably 12 to 15 years now. Bryan was a consultant at CDW back in the day doing a lot of Citrix work. And I remember Bryan came into one of our more difficult accounts here that I worked with locally as a Citrix sales engineer. And Bryan did a really good job working with those guys from a handling them perspective, as well as knowing what he needed to know to get the consulting work done. So Bryan's a principal sales engineer. That's recent, right? He got promoted. Bryan's a principal sales engineer with Citrix and a good friend of XenTegra's, and glad to have you on, Bryan. How's everything in you still in Wisconsin?
Still in Wisconsin. We had a little bit of snow yesterday or the day before, so still loving winter. And thanks for the intro, Andy. That's great. Yeah, that was a fun customer to work at. That was back when IOPS really mattered.
Oh, that's right. That's back when trying to get enough IOPS through was either cost a fortune or you just lived with what you had.
Doing all that math on those spinning discs, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
So, Bryan, appreciate you joining. I guess you're working from home. I guess maybe you always work from home, right?
About 15 years now. I've been a remote worker, living that kind of lifestyle. So this is nothing new to me.
You know, somebody asked me the other day after I was helping them with the new architecture and quoting them out some licenses on how to get through this circumstances with the business continuity. They said, "Well, okay, so how are you doing it?" I was like, "Well, I haven't done anything different. We do this all day, every day. My desktop is in a cloud. My apps are in clouds. This is just normal, right? The only difference is there's nobody in the office with me."
Well, it's a little different, right? Kids are home, so now you do have some office mates.
Well, I'll take a minute to brag on my son, and I'm kind of doing some of this for him, but he's definitely involved. We're taking iGel units. We're taking old computers and converting them to iGel and putting Chrome on it so that we can hand them out for kids to go to school from home, the new normal.
That's awesome. Yeah, I saw that. That's great work.
Yeah. So, Bryan, you wrote a blog, I think maybe yesterday or the day before. Oh, no, you got a blog from back in the day. This is from 2018, right?
Yeah, it's pretty funny how it becomes a little relevant these days, right? A couple of years, and it comes back around to be very relevant.
So, one of the things I do want to highlight, and I've done this on the last couple episodes of the podcast here, is, nothing's changed for XenTegra. Nothing's changed for people like Bryan Mann, who have been talking about how to work wherever and from whatever for all these years. But your blog is from October 22nd, 2018, and that is to VPN or not to VPN. And it's obviously a very relevant topic all the time and relevant now. You want to walk us through a little background on why this was an important blog for you?
Oh, for me, it still goes back to the consulting days where we'd walk into a place and you're talking to somebody and they had a Citrix solution in place, but they're still using VPN for most of their access. Even up until, a couple of years ago or 4.5 years ago when I started at Citrix, it still kind of shocked me that was in place when they had the Citrix solution sitting there that would be much more secure for them.
Do you remember the very first time you logged into a computer and maybe through dial-up or maybe you were on broadband, you connected to your company network and said, "This is amazing. I can go anywhere I want now"?
Yeah, I remember those lovely tones, right? The beep, 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 and you get connected.
Yeah. Next thing you know, you could talk to every computer in the environment. And maybe that's a big part of the problem. You want to give us a little history lesson on virtual private networks? We haven't even said those words yet. Virtual private networks, aka VPNs.
Yeah, so I mean, the tradition, like you mentioned, it you connect up and you're attached to your network at work, and you could have full access to everything behind it, depending on the design. Some folks, designed it fairly well, where there's a quarantine area that you come into with a VPN, but still you had access to the network from home, from a possible untrusted network, and enabling you to what they thought was work securely at the time. The other things they didn't take into account now is that everything on that network could see your network at home, right? Maybe back in the day, it wasn't that big of a deal, 1 or 2 computers, but now everything's connected in your network at home.
Hey, Bill, do you remember your first VPN experience?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, of course. I also remember my first experience dialing over one of those 1XRTT cards to a Citrix environment. Both of them were equally surprising and exciting.
Yeah.
And I mean, ironically or coincidentally, whichever the right word is, I got involved heavily with NetScaler Gateway, or back in the day, the old CAG, right? The Citrix Access Gateway, because of the avian flu in the early 2000s. I was working with a company way back then that was coming up with some type of business continuity plan around their users not being able to get to work. And wow, here we are in 2020 talking about the same thing.
Yeah, it just keeps coming full circle.
Yeah.
Hey, Bryan, you have a note in here talking about, to be clear, what full VPN means to you. You want to kind of give our listeners your definitions of what we're talking about here around virtual private networks?
Sure. I mean, in a traditional sense, the full IPsec VPN tunnel is what I was referring to, because with SSL VPNs or per app VPNs or micro VPNs that you get into the mobility world, there are other things that they can hook into and provide various controls as compared to the IPsec tunnel. So when we're talking about this, is like, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? I have a client that I've installed on my laptop, and I double click it and away I go. Provide my credentials and I'm connected over an IPsec tunnel, not via an SSL VPN or containerized per app or micro VPN.
Hey, since I got two kind of older IT guys, consultants on this podcast with me, what's the only way you can secure a computer?
Pull out the network.
Turn it off.
Unplug it. Yeah.
Turn it off. Unplug the network and drop it in the ocean.
Yeah, right. So turning it off, you kind of got me on that one. That's not what I expected you to say. However, that is accurate. Sort of. I mean, then you pick it up, take it with you, take the hard drive out, go on and on. But my point is, VPN is kind of the counter argument or counter scenario of unplugging it from the network, which is the only way to secure it. You're opening it up to everything that can get through that VPN unless it's been securely tightened down. And Bryan, as you know, most people don't do that, right? They don't put it in isolated VLAN. They don't tighten down the access, even though everybody knows you should.
Right, and that it also goes to one of the first points that we're looking there is the trust model is part of that, right? You said sometimes they lock the VLANs down, but the bigger point is in the past, we always trusted those devices that had the VPN client on them, right? They were managed by the corporate IT staff, and they went home and they were secure, and that big 30-pound compact laptop that you used to carry around was trusted, right? Nowadays, those things have really changed. You don't know what somebody might be using to come in on.
And I like to highlight this too. I mean, what we do in IT is we provide access to applications and data. And historically, this VPN conversations have been done and handled by the networking guys, which, they do what they do at the network level. But man, application security is a whole different thing than ones and zeros across the switches.
Exactly. I mean, there's nothing to say that if I don't have that network infrastructure correct, that I wouldn't be able to get to a database I normally wouldn't have access to.
Yeah. Or maybe hop through one jump device to another.
Yep.
All right. So you got the trust model. We kind of covered that. Third party. What do you mean by third party consultants? And these are, when approaching, it says, typically I start with a couple considerations. One is knowing your audience, right? This third-party consultants and access needs. Right.
So that third-party consultant, and we've been in consulting before, when you went on site to a customer, were you usually allowed to plug your laptop right into their network, or did they give you a laptop? If you were doing remote work, were you able to use their laptop, or did they give you one to take home? I think it's becoming more prevalent in these days of folks outsourcing some of their level one or their run operations to overseas support folks, or even third parties here in the States to handle that. You don't have control over that endpoint, let alone that network. So in that case, do you really want to open up a full tunnel between you and that network?
Hey, Bill, do you think there's any chance you've got an old laptop laying around, or maybe even the one you're on right now, that you could open up a VPN connection to an old customer and nobody knows that it still exists?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's scary, huh?
It is scary. Yep.
So, Bryan, your next bullet here is about changing application landscape, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. It's not your father's, it's not your networking guy's network anymore. There's a lot of application related centric that the VPN just doesn't understand.
And I think there's actually two layers to this little point. And there's the first one, right, is if we're doing a VPN and you're turning off split tunneling, let's say, like you probably should, all that traffic that a user would normally go out to the internet from their home device to use a SaaS app is now coming back through your environment, putting strain on that network connection, also probably impacting the performance for that user, making it not fun for them to use. It just presents just another performance and or security concern, for you on that app for SaaS.
And that probably ties into your last bullet here, and that's the fact that if you make it slightly hard for an end user, they're going to find a way to work around you and create problems that you may not have planned for.
Right, and I think this becomes even more prevalent in the age of using personal devices or that type of access. Is why should my personal laptop get locked down to where I can't surf the web to go check on a payment that I need to make, or check on a healthcare claim? I have to disconnect my VPN and then go browse and then come back to my VPN to do work. I should be able to flow kind of between both of them, but yet still have the security on the back end that I need.
Yeah, my son was in the office yesterday, and not necessarily a VPN story, but we jumped on the building's Wi-Fi for a few minutes to go download stuff because we have to block stuff within XenTegra's network. He kind of looked at me like, well, that's silly. I was like, well, that's how it works.
Right, exactly.
Hey, Bill, any thoughts on those topics?
Well, I think you were touching on, I don't know if you said the term or not, I might have missed it, this concept of split tunneling and allowing them to do what they want to do on their local machine. That's something that, a lot of folks turned on, and back in the day, users would complain, like you said, I want to be able to get to my banking site or what have you, and that split tunnel was just an invitation to get stuff into your network.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, normal users wouldn't think about the reverse thing, right? Well, now all of a sudden that corporate network has full access to my home network.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
So there's a story of one of the guys I work with. Actually, his girlfriend has to VPN in for work. So the first thing he did was put her on an isolated wireless network in his home. So that network couldn't get back to the stuff that he had on his own home network.
Yeah.
Yeah, if everybody just had a network admin at home, this would be easy.
Right. My kids love me because of that, right? Oh,
yeah. Okay, so Bryan, you got this section here where you're talking about accessing virtual apps, and maybe you mean desktops as part of that as well. I think you do, but that goes a long way in solving this problem. But you're going to point out later there's more to it. What were you covering here in this section?
Basically, right, centralized access. We've all talked about living the Citrix world, right, what it really means to help. And it started with the fact that I had an office maybe halfway across the country that needed access to a database app, back in headquarters, and Citrix really dropped in to provide performance there, right? The side effect is security as well, because I'm now keeping that within my walls that I've used to that perimeter, and just allowing the proper access into that, right? And that's just the first part about it, from the standpoint that, hey, that's a great start, but what about other things that we need to look at? Like we mentioned, some of the SaaS apps, are there better ways to do that? I think really here is the key to what I mentioned before is I was surprised at the number of customers using full VPN tunnels just to give access to Citrix, right? This didn't make sense to me.
Well, and that's where the Citrix solution of maybe the NetScaler, the what's now called Citrix Application Delivery Controller (ADC), having a device like that that can limit application access, but also be a full-blown SSL VPN if needed. Probably makes a lot of sense. And this
I'm sorry, it's interesting to hear what you just said, Brian, because the concept of accessing Citrix over a VPN actually came up on a customer call literally yesterday. They were complaining, but they were using a full SSL VPN, not on the NetScaler, to get into the environment, then hitting storefront and going to their apps. And it wasn't performing as well as some of their employees said their former employer did, which was using 100% ICA all the way through. So there are still customers that do that stuff. It's crazy.
Yep. Some people are saying, well, we want visibility into the network. And,
right.
I asked a question. So you want to allow possible malware to traverse your network so you can see it?
Yeah.
And you still get a quizzical look and they go, well, no, that's just what we do. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where somebody was actually bragging about a VPN solution. And I was like, it's okay to have it. And I get it, but there's better ways. But no, I definitely would not be bragging about how you've implemented one. That's it's not necessarily the answer in my world anyway. So, Brian, your section here about trust is key. You kind of alluded to what we talked about a while ago, right? If you had a superstar network admin husband and you could isolate everything and run antivirus and take admin rights away and all the great things, if you had that superstar husband, which we all kind of are, and we think we should get our kudos for that. We should finally get our just rewards. But anyway, if you had that guy at home, there's a chance that the VPN might actually make sense. But let's be honest, we don't keep our home networks the way we would probably like to either. But my point there is, you had the section here where you talk about in a perfect world, VPNs wouldn't be bad, but we don't live in a perfect world.
Right, and the trust is part of it, right? And even if you trust your network end to end, and from that endpoint to the resource, right? Maybe VPN makes some sense, right? But once that endpoint becomes a full participant on the network, you have to have some type of constant verification, right? Whether it's more firewalls, IDS, IPS, which leads to complexity. And as you talk to CIOs or CISOs, right, the more complex things get, the more risk is involved. So trying to keep it simple helps reduce that risk, and it reduces the need for all these other tools to look at. And this is actually written before the whole zero trust idea came about, right? And this is kind of where it starts is, with a VPN, you kind of automatically break that zero trust.
I mean, you give somebody access to Notepad as an example, right? That's one of our fun ones, maybe a calculator. What can they really do? However, you give them access to a desktop or command prompts, now all of a sudden they've got a platform to get places. Bill, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think if you give them access to a desktop or or to a command prompt, I think you have equal issues there. Whether you're doing VPN or whether you're in Citrix, but you can lock it down a lot easier in the latter.
Yeah, I got to tell you guys this story. It just happened to me a minute ago, and it's kind of related, but keeping it simple, right? So I use the laptop I'm on right now. I actually normally boot it from an iGel UD Pocket, which is a USB boot stick. And it was time for this call, and I needed to boot into Windows for a moment, even though I can now do Ring Central meetings from iGel locally. But I pulled out UD Pocket, and they've made that thing so smart that the minute I pulled it out, it just locked down the operating system. It actually turned the machine off. It said, if you do that to me, I'm turning you off. Done.
Yep.
So, Brian, you got the section here on anchoring VPNs, anchor users. What do you mean there?
If I don't have a device where I can part of it, let's go back to the first part we talked about before. A trusted device means I'm only allowed to VPN from a trusted device for my corporate rules. Well, that means I always have to have that device with me, right? And I like to use the term with, you may lose customer FaceTime, or maybe you have to turn it back on the customer because now you've got to go back and plug in your laptop, hook up to the VPN to pull something that customer needs. You've lost that FaceTime, which can be very important. It anchors me to that device. So if I'm traveling and my laptop breaks, I'm done, right? How long does it take for corporate to give me a laptop that's going to work? Now, some of that's changed, right? The ability to go out to a web page, download the VPN, or go to a web page and log into VPN, but still I'm anchored to my trusted device.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm in the office by myself all week. I've got 3-4 devices right here around me. I move from device to device to device all day long, all of them going back to my virtual desktop. Sometimes I go sit in other offices. They're all kind of hoteling type concepts, and I go from office to office just to change my scenery since I'm the only one here.
For me, I've been moving from my office to our sunroom to the patio. That's changing my scenery.
Oh. All right, so you talk about BYO here. I think that goes back a little bit to what you were just talking about there, but BYO and needing to have all your devices get access, but securely and mitigated, probably a big part of the story here, right?
Big part of the story, and it comes to philosophical discussions too, because you still have those IT departments that still want to manage the endpoint because of security concerns. But with the gateway that we've been talking about and smart access policies, that just goes away. You don't have to worry about it. And BYO is still somewhat of a tough concept for some enterprises to take on, but you're seeing more and more where it's starting to make sense to them because they're out of the procurement business. They're not worrying about going out and buying 3,000 laptops. I had a situation, I have a customer that every summer they bring on 5,000 interns, and they're provisioning 5,000 laptops every summer. So we've been working with them to come up with a better way to do things.
And then you have in this section here, I highlighted it for us as a conversation, but smart access, right? And the ability to pretty much look and do whatever I need to at the time of connection as well as post-connection.
Right. So the idea, hey, I've told you who I am. Now let's take a look at what I am, right? What device am I on? Am I on a trusted device? Okay, great. Do this. I'm not on an untrusted device. Don't do that. I'm on a trusted network versus an untrusted network, different behaviors depending on my context. So that contextual security that we all talk about, who, what, why, where, when, for access.
Yeah. All right. And then this next section, you talk about mobility. I'll tell a quick story. I teach a lot of classes. I used to teach a lot of classes, and we used to use VPNs in the classes to get to, I think it was my Cisco HyperFlex class. And a guy showed up one day with a Chromebook, and I had no answer for that. And, he was kind of shocked that I didn't, but had to use VPNs for that. I think a Cisco AnyConnect, and I had no answer for him at that moment. And here you're talking about mobility and the ability to use whatever device, be wherever you need to. And because we're just simply making those micro connections, it can and does work.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the Chromebook story too, because my first foray into even Cisco ICE, the ability to try to get a certificate onto a Chromebook from a Windows Certificate Authority doesn't work very well.
No,
so my Chromebook was useless on the network. But yeah, the mobility, right? We have those per app VPNs or micro VPN capabilities to allow you to work inside, a container and secure the corporate data while still keeping the personal side to the personal side. And that's really key. And one problem with the full VPN clients, and even in the early days of some of the mobility apps, they would drain your battery. And the fact that most people live off their tablets or their phones for a big part of their workday, that's going to be detrimental.
Yeah, it's a crazy feeling, but you get to the end of the day or halfway through the day and your battery's dying, and we feel like we can't live without these silly things.
Low power mode goes on first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I started doing that. All right, so next topic here is about making the endpoint a low-value target. What you're pointing out here is in the case of Citrix, virtual apps, virtual desktops, even SaaS apps, in the Citrix story there's nothing there, right? There's nothing resonant. It doesn't have to be anything resonant, and that makes for a low attack point, right?
Exactly. And actually, I have to credit Kurt Romer for bringing me down this discussion point. And we had some time during our travels and we were talking about this, and he really gave me that term, and I really latched onto it because it's true. Even though I may have a MacBook or a laptop, whatever I travel with, it's a low value target because all my stuff is sitting elsewhere. And it's just like you said, the UD pockets, which I have a few here too that I use, it's perfect, right? There's nothing there. Go ahead, steal it, destroy it. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get any of my data or my company's data. Yeah,
it's amazing when you live that way. I've got a MacBook Pro that that I use some now still, but I got to the point recently in the last 6 months where I would just kind of leave it laying around, and I was like, well, if somebody takes it, they take it. It's 4 years old and nothing on it. I won anyway. And maybe that's a very dumb way to look at things, but because most of what I do is in the cloud somewhere, I didn't kind of feel like I didn't care.
Exactly. And I mean, like, there's one thing I pointed out too, right, is there's a lot of concern about travel and what happens. And one of the first customers I worked with when I came to Citrix, the discussion was, well, we have executives that travel to China, right? We'll pick up a Chromebook, away you go, right? Did they steal the Chromebook or the Chinese government decided to take it? No big deal. There's nothing lost.
So
no data loss. That's right. Yeah.
I have another funny story there where I was using a Wise laptop a bunch of years ago now.
Wow.
And it was stolen at a gas station. Well, turns out the rental car company called me a week or so later and said they had my laptop. It wasn't actually stolen. I was just dumb enough and lost it in the trunk. But I had this story of I didn't care because it was just a thin client laptop. There was nothing resonant on it. And it made for a great story. And turns out I'm just an idiot, which that's not a surprise.
Yeah, I go back to the mid 2000s. I had a law firm that I did work for back then, and they gave the attorneys full laptops, client data on them, everything, going out to trial or going to meetings. And one of the attorneys had his laptop stolen in an airport, and so they had to notify everyone about it. And they came to me and said, "How can we fix this? I mean, how can we limit the data that's on the device?" And I said, "Well, we'll put in a Citrix infrastructure. Keep the data back at the office. Let the attorney, when they're on the road, access the data via Citrix over the internet." They can access all their applications, give them a secure connection via Access Gateway, or actually CSG at that time, probably. Nevertheless, we went down that road and, really saved their bacon in the future, because they had situations where devices were stolen during that time. At that point, they didn't care, like you said, Andy, because there's nothing on them.
You guys know what a pusher in Las Vegas is?
Is it the guy who hands out the trading cards?
No, that's a different guy. The pusher. I was speaking at a conference one time about Citrix and security around it. And that morning, I heard a story. It was kind of famous because it was one of the guys at the conference that was a leader. He got his laptop stolen. Apparently, people get really drunk in Las Vegas. Imagine that. And they don't shut their door all the way. And people go down the halls pushing on doors, and when they find one that opens, they go in and steal their valuables. And 10 years ago, that was their laptop. And so a couple of the executives at the conference had their laptops stolen by pushers who push doors.
Wow.
Man.
It made my my intro at the conference a really easy conversation because, well, first of all, those two guys weren't there. They were filing police reports, but it was a good opportunity for me to say, hey, and this is what we do. This is what we help solve.
Exactly.
So, Bryan, pretty much last section here, you talk about the new application landscape requires layers of security. I think you're going to have a great topic here to cover.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, right, Andy? You said my stuff's in the cloud. It's not on my laptop. It's in this cloud. It's in that cloud. And back in 2018 is when we first announced the new Workspace app and the Workspace platform, which has evolved over the last couple of years. Because, from a web app or a SaaS app, standpoint, I can publish that in Citrix, and that's been a great way to go. The number one published application in Citrix for years was Internet Explorer. To give access to web apps and to SaaS apps. But with the new, evolution of the workspace that we have, giving access to SaaS apps and controlling that, things like cut and paste, print, and the new application protection policies we have out there to block print screen, you can secure your SaaS apps. I've worked with several customers that are using Workspace to present those SaaS apps and then providing multi-factor security on logging into Workspace and then single sign-on in the background to SaaS apps, while at the same time turning off, direct access to that SaaS app, forcing a SAML assertion to be used. That way, they're forcing everybody through one point of entry, easier to secure and manage, but the experience for the users even becomes better because it's one spot.
Secure, manage, and monitor. And as you're pointing out here, we're talking about beyond Citrix traditional virtual app and desktop. Now we're talking SaaS apps. So, again, user gets a better experience. you have limited your vulnerability, but at the same time, what is going to the user can be viewed in real time and monitored for security and performance reasons.
Yeah, and it was in a meeting a while back, and somebody brought up 3 words: visibility, action, and control, right? Through that, I get visibility into what the users are doing through Workspace with analytics, where I can take action and then gain control of the environment. So those are 3 key things that I try to walk through, and we talk about the different layers of security and what you need to keep track of what your users are doing.
So, Bryan, as we start to wrap up, you've mentioned Kurt a couple of times. Kurt Romer is the chief security strategist at Citrix. Sorry. And Kurt's a very valuable resource. And so if people aren't following him online, they should. If he speaks somewhere local to you or online, he's definitely a great person to have there. He gets security well beyond just the network layer that is kind of the genesis for this conversation we're having here.
Exactly. And one thing I do want to point out that's in that blog too is I'm not a VPN hater, right? There's a tool that you can use whenever you need it, right? And it's part of having a very toolbox, and that's really what I wanted to bring across in this as well.
Hey, Bill, any additional comments on this topic of VPN?
Yeah, I think what you just said, Bryan, is it's all about what's the right tool for the situation, and we have a lot of customers that still use VPNs. Thankfully, I think most of them are using them for specific purposes and not giving them out to the broader population. For them, they're leveraging the technologies that we all sell and manage and implement. But you do still have some of those that are stuck in that VPN well, if you will, where they're giving it to everybody. And I've seen it in the past week, with this pandemic and people working from home, and that's really the only solution some customers had. They were talking to us because they were already in the process of getting a CVAT environment stood up, and sometimes in some cases that got accelerated. In other cases, they went to what they'd known for years.
Right, and you mentioned it right. They're deploying VPN because it's fast to deploy right now.
Exactly.
And maybe they're bypassing some of the security and performance challenges that they think they're going to face because they have to react quickly. Where folks like yourselves, XenTegra, are out there trying to educate folks that, hey, you already have a solution in your toolbox with Citrix Gateway, and maybe it's a remote PC, like you had that podcast with Gabe, right? Yeah. It's there. It's just a matter of talking to the customers and educating them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to listen to the Remote PC podcast that we have. And I think Bryan did a webinar just yesterday. I assume that was recorded, right?
Yeah, actually, Scott Lane and I got together on a Wednesday and just had a nice little light discussion about workforce continuity.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate it. I just got the order from my governor, actually my county, that I have got to go home and stay home. So apparently I'm on lockdown, and my wife's texting me now saying I got to get home, and that's great. Of course, she wants me to go by Target first, which is kind of crazy.
Yep. I get locked down tonight at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
But everybody be safe out there, stay well. And if you find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, reach out if you got questions. I'm all about asking questions and helping people out.
No, that's great, Bryan. Yeah, I was going to be my next question is where to find Bryan Mann. That's good. Okay, so let's give you one more chance. Anything else you want to make sure you get across while we're wrapping this one up?
It doesn't have to be as hard as people think, right? There's a few easy solutions that we have out there with Citrix with Remote PC and NetScaler Gateway, and even with the Gateway service and other cloud things we can stand up where you don't need to worry about your infrastructure.
Yeah, you don't need a network admin at home to even do the service stuff, right?
Exactly.
Or even in your office, I guess I should say it that way.
Yep. Point, click, and go.
And then Citrix Managed Desktop, right? That's another part of the Citrix service story, which the connectivity we're talking about here is just another entitlement of it that just magically happens. Makes it super easy.
Exactly.
Hey, Bill, any parting words?
Nope. No, I've enjoyed this. This has been really good conversation.
Yeah, Bryan, we'll have to have you back on if you write another blog. Yeah. Let us know. We'll put you right into the front of the line.
That's right.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
All right. Appreciate everybody listening. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton. A special thanks to our guests, podcast produced by Pete Downing. Head over to XenTegra.com/podcast to listen to all podcasts in this series.